announcements. Inshallah, these majlises are going to go on until Sunday of next week. Inshallah, we'll start the programs with Namaz Maghribain, and on Friday and Saturday, we'll start it at 8 p.m. with the in Tabarruk. Our Urdu speaker is Mana Mirza Zaheen Najafi, and our English speaker is Sheikh Reza Hemyani. Um, Today's majlis is sponsored by Brother Bakir Zaidi and Dr. Sania Zahra and Abbas Faik and Sister Reshma. And the Tabarruk is sponsored by Brother Taha Abdi and Dr. Afshin and Sayyid Taki Amir and Sister Madiha. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for all Marhumin and Mominat, your own Marhumin and Mominat. Though for those Marhumin and Mominat, there's nobody to recite Fatiha for. Also for the Marhumin and Mominat on the wall of Zahra. And today's sponsors, Marhumin, whose names are as follows: Rehana Zaidi, Ashfaq Zaidi, Muti Zaidi, Ijaz Fatma, Saklan Zaidi, Sayyidan Zaidi, Ikram Nakvi, Jawad Nakvi, Amir Fatima, Sayyida Abdi, Aslam Bano, Rafiq Hussain, Amatu Batul, Sayyid Mumtaz Hussain, Hassan Bano, Sayyid Zahram Hussain, Amir Bano, Sayyid Muhammad Hassan, Sakina Bano, Sayyid Alim Hussain, and all the Marhumin of Zoya and Zain Abdi. Please recite a Surah Fatiha. Inshallah, ICZ Youth will be holding their second annual cemetery majlis on August 12th at 4 p.m. in Five Pillars Cemetery. If you guys want to donate any donations towards Tabarruk or anything, please reach out to me or reach out to me in person. Or if you guys see the flyer, there is a Venmo on the flyer. You guys could send donations through that. And inshallah, we'll start with the tilawat al-Quran. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. Please, I'm gonna request Brother Shayan to please come recite a short poetry. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. है माँ तू मुझे पास बुला بلا لو، مجھے پیاس ستاتی ہے، اے ماں تو مجھے پاس بلا لو، مجھے پیاس ستاتی ہے، تربت سے علی اصغر کی، تربت سے علی اصغر کی آواز یہ آتی ہے، اے ماں تو مجھے پاس بلا لو، مجھے پیاس ستاتی ہے، یاد آئے بہت مجھ کو تیرا جھولا جھولانا، ہے کبھی سینے سے لگا کے تیرا لوری سنانا، جب ریت گرم پیاری ماں، جب ریت گرم پیاری ماں میرے تن کو جلاتی ہے، اے ماں تو مجھے پاس بلا لو، مجھے پیاس ستاتی ہے، پیاس کی شدت سے گلا سوکھا پڑا ہے زخمی گلا اس میں ماں درد بھرا ہے، تربت میں اکیلا ہوں میں، تربت میں اکیلا ہوں میں، تنہائی در آتی ہے، اے ماں تو مجھے پاس بلا لو، مجھے پیاس ستاتی ہے، پر محمد والے محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
Please recite another loud salawat for Brother Shayan. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'll recite a short poem on the Tiflan Muslim. Please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala. Hi Muslim ke pisar, hi Muslim ke pisar, hi Muslim ke pisar, hi Muslim ke pisar. نیم جارو تے رہے اپنی جان کھوتے رہے، اپنی جان کھوتے رہے، نیم جان روتے رہے، کچھ نہ فریاد سنی اس ستمگر نے مگر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر. کہیں دیکھی نہ سنی اے غریب الوطنی، اے غریب الوطنی کہیں دیکھی نہ سنی، تیغ حارس کی چلی کٹ گئے دونوں کے سر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر۔ کون کوفے میں بھلا جا کے مسلم سے کہے، جا کے مسلم سے کہے، کون کوفے میں بھلا نہر پر مارے گئے آپ کے لخت جگر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر۔ بہر شاہ شہداء دونوں بچے باخدا، دونوں بچے باخدا، بہر شاہ شہداء اپنے بابا کی طرح ہو گئے خون میں تر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر۔ رو کے زوجہ نے کہا یہ ہے بے جرم و خطا، یہ ہے بے جرم و خطا، رو کے زوجہ نے کہا کچھ ترس کھا حارس ان پہ یہ ظلم نہ کر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر، ہائے مسلم کے پسر۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔ And with that, I'd like to welcome Sheikh Reza Hemyani to please bless us with a speech. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
الفاتحة. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى يوم الدين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. A second louder salawat. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have arrived at these verses 10 and 11 of Surah Al-Fajr. Allah in this surah has so far been, first he started with an oath by the dawn, wal fajr, wal layalin ashr, and then the 10 nights, wal layalin ashr, wal shaf'i wal watr, wal layli idha yasr, by the even and the odd, and then by the night as it passes by, as it journeys on. Hal fi dhalika qasamun ladhi hijr. Is there not therein an oath for those who have intellect? Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi'ad. Do you not see how your Lord dealt with the people of Ad? Iram dhatil imad. The people of Iram who had these pillared buildings. Allati lam yukhlaq mithluha fil bilad. A people who were not created, anyone was not created like them before. They were unique. وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ. And then the people of Thamud. Do you not see how your Lord dealt with them? Those who etched out their homes in the rocks in the valley. وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ. And the Pharaoh who was an impaler, a person who would peg people to the ground. الَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ. A people who rebelled against your Lord. الَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ. In their cities, these people would rebel in their cities. فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ. And they made plentiful, and they caused much corruption in those cities. فَصَبَّ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّكَ سَوْطَ عَذَابٍ. So your Lord poured on them, according to one translation, lashes of punishment, or scourge of punishment. إِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ. Indeed, your Lord is in ambush. Your Lord is awaiting them. Last few nights we have been talking about the first of these two civilizations, of these two towns, these two people. We talked about Iram, or the people of Ad, a people who, it seems in their entirety, rejected their prophet, a prophet by the name of Hud. And then Allah speaks about Thamud, a people who Allah sent the prophet Saleh, who now an elite group of those people, a boastful and a proud group of those people, come and reject the prophet, and they kill that miracle that that prophet brought to them, that she-camel that Nabi Saleh brought to the people of Thamud. And then Allah speaks about Pharaoh, the famous Pharaoh of the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. And Allah speaks about him in terms of a person who would peg. This translation, it says, Pharaoh who was the impaler. According to some of the tafasir, it is said that Pharaoh would, those he wanted to torture, he would lie them on the ground and he would impale them with pegs into the ground. He would crucify those people, whether it is on the ground or on wood. He was the first one to come up with this special type of torture. And then Allah continues. He says, those who rebelled against their Lord in their cities and caused much corruption in those cities. But Allah, in these verses, He says, I don't leave them be. So your Lord poured, almost like someone pours water, your Lord poured upon them in a continuous and in a very drastic way. Your Lord poured upon them their punishment. Not just one punishment, but one punishment after another. Indeed, your Lord is in ambush. Indeed, Allah is waiting. He is waiting, and He's giving them time to increase in their sins. I'd like to take this opportunity to think about what were the things at stake. What was at stake when we think about the events of Karbala? As I mentioned, we can try to trace all of the events of Karbala and the entire mission of Imam Hussein according to various verses of the Quran, and in particular, this chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fajr. What does Allah mean when He talks about Fir'aun? And then He says that Allah allows a certain people to continue in their sin, to continue in their evil and in their torture. But then Allah is waiting in ambush. Kind of think about that image. You wait in ambush for your prey to come into view, for it to lower its defenses, and then the predator pounces upon the prey when it least expects it. This is one of the wisdoms and one of the traditions of Allah. As I mentioned, there are three different people that Allah mentions in these verses. And maybe one of the reasons why Allah mentions three people, three different types of people. First is Aad, or the people of Iram. Maybe the people of Iram, we know that those people, they all rejected the message of their Lord, the message of their Prophet in their entirety. And so Allah punishes the entire people of Iram. And then Allah talks about the people of Thamud. And Allah says that there is an elite of these people who rejected the miracle and the revelation of their Prophet. And so the people of Thamud, they are punished as well. But it is because of the elite, those proud and those boastful people who had kibr and istikbar towards the revelation of God. And so it is a select few. And then Allah talks about Fir'aun. It is the people, the person, the individual who is in charge. And despite the fact that all of the people around him are slowly, one after another, accepting the message of Musa, that famous story that is mentioned in the Quran, the sorcerers who Pharaoh comes and gathers to try to refute the supposed magic, but in fact the miracle of Nabi Musa, those very sorcerers now come and accept the message of Musa. And so on one level, it is the king that is ultimately responsible. It is the Pharaoh that is held to account in these verses. So maybe Allah is saying That in certain instances, there is an entire people who is responsible for the sin and that moral rot that is taking place within their souls and within their society. In other instances, there is a certain group who are maybe in charge, but they are going to be held responsible and they are going to oppress those who accept the revelation and the teaching of Allah and their Prophet. And then ultimately, the onus and the responsibility falls upon that person or that individual in charge. But then Allah says, regardless of what situation a people find them in, Allah does not let them be. He is always accounting for their actions, especially if those people are causing corruption in the land. And Allah is going to take them and hold them to account in this world, not just in the hereafter, but Allah waits for them. Allah mentions this sunnah. We have different sunan of God, different traditions and different practices that God puts into place in His creation. Almost like there are certain laws and rules that God abides by when He is dealing with His creation. Sometimes, as I mentioned in a previous night, Allah takes a people and He punishes those people at the instant in which they commit an error. And so, for example, when it is said that Nabi Adam committed a tarke ola, he committed not an error, not a mistake, but he did not do the best thing that was possible for him. Allah sends him down and He casts him to this earth and He makes him suffer the difficulties of this earth. And we have other examples of this when, for example, different people are taken to account at that moment in which they disobey Allah. There are other moments, there are other people, there are other instances where Allah allows for those people to further their sin, for them to carry out what they do, and for them to see the effects of their action. In Surah Al Imran, Allah mentions this. Ayah number 178. He says, وَلَا يَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Don't let those people, let not those people who are disbelieving in what you have been given. Those people who disbelieve, those kuffar, don't let them think or don't let them reckon that we give them time and this time that we give them is good for them. This is not to their benefit. إِنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِثْمًا. We give them time. We delay their punishment and their torture so that they can increase in sin. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And for them is a type of punishment that will bring them lowly. And so, in other words, there are times in which Allah delays His punishment. For those who are believers and for those who have the potential, and Allah sees that one day they are going to fulfill their belief, Allah delays their punishment. Just like a father or a mother might delay the punishments that they give to their child. A father at one time will say, for example, I will allow my child to learn on his own. I will allow my child to make the mistakes. And through those mistakes, he will understand the effects of his actions. That is one way of teaching your child. Don't always go and hold their hand. Don't always go and stand in their way. They can learn their own mistakes and they can learn maybe even sometimes better than if we were to teach them every single step that they should take. But then there are other times in which, for example, Allah says, I will let you take those steps. Allah sees that this person is not going to fulfill the potential for good that He has placed in them. He sees that that person is evil to their core. And Allah, He says that I'm going to allow you to commit the sin. Maybe so that other people around you can take lessons from that sin. They can see that if I torture, if I commit crimes, if I disrupt the peace and the security of the people, then this is the effect of those actions. But then at other times, according to this ayah of the Quran, Allah is simply allowing those people to fall farther and farther into sin. So that at the right time, He can point to them and He can tell them, these are the lists of your errors. This is the long list of sins that you have committed. We take this as an example for why Allah allowed for a person like Yazid to come into power. As I mentioned, we can track the events of Karbala according to the words of the Quran. Why did Allah allow for Imam Hussein to be killed in this most brutal of ways? And He allowed his family to be killed. What was, in other words, the stakes of the events of Karbala? What lessons can we draw from those events? To understand this, we really have to understand the history and the context of those events. We have to understand what was the background for a person like Yazid to come into power and for him to commit those atrocities. As I mentioned, this verse of the Quran, he talks about Pharaoh as a king. If we track Islamic history, in particular after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih, we see that there is an institution, a position that is called Khalifatu Rasulullah, the successor to Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah. And over time, Rasulullah died in the 10 years or so after Hijrah. Over a span of 50 years, the events of Karbala took place in what year? The 61st year after Hijrah. So there's a span of about 50 years in which that's the length of the duration between the death of the Prophet of Islam and the events of Karbala. During these 50 years, we see that this entire institution of Khilafat, of the ruler of the Muslims, in other words, of the position of Amirul Mu'mineen, changes 180 degrees from that which Rasulullah had set into place. There was a certain tradition, a certain custom that Rasulullah had. But then over time, that custom changes. What does it mean to lead, in other words, the Muslims? We see that in a span of 25 years between the death of Rasulullah and the Khilafat of Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A lot of these changes are taking place. So on the one hand, we see that the Khalifa, the position of the Khalifa, becomes a total position. It becomes the full inheritor of the legacy of Rasulullah. I mentioned this in a previous night and in the past few days, that we want to think about who is it that carries on Not just the person who leads the Muslims, but who is it that carries on the legacy of the Prophet of Islam? The Khalifa, he comes and he takes on that burden of the legacy of Rasulullah. He becomes the full inheritor of Rasulullah. And so that's why we see that the Khalifa claims for himself even the personal property that was due to the Ahlul Bayt, in particular Lady Fatima Zahra. The Khalifa comes and claims that for himself. And another time, the Khalifa says that if you go against me, if you don't give me your zakat, this is never something that Rasulullah did. If you don't give the Khalifa to Rasulullah the zakat, the taxes that every Muslim should give, if you don't give those taxes, then you and your life is at stake. I can come and fight you. I can even, as the Khalifa, the successor to Rasulullah, I can even come and kill that person. I can take on their possession at force despite whatever decision they make. That's not something that Rasulullah ever did. But we see that that is a tradition that the Khalifa creates. And then it becomes the Khalifa sends out armies into the various places of the surrounding areas, the different empires, and the Khalifa starts all of these different wars and these different battles. And then what happens is that the Khilafat becomes a possession of a particular tribe and a particular family. Goes from, and this is in fact an interesting change in the history of the Muslims. I said, what was the title? Initially it was Khalifatu Rasulullah, the successor to who? Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah. But during the third Khalifa's time, this title changes to Khalifatullah, the successor to Allah. In other words, that person that Allah himself placed into power. No more is it something that you have to get the bay'ah from the Ansar and the Muhajirin. That is the events of Saqifa. And no more is it going to be a shura of the greatest and the most noble or the highest, the most revered Muslims or the most revered companions of the prophets. That was the shura that was set into place to select the third Khalifa, correct? This is a little bit of a history lesson, so you'll excuse me. But we want to understand, again, what was at stake and why did Imam Hussein rise up against a person like Yazid? For us to understand what was at stake, we have to understand a little bit of this historical context. We see that the first Khalifa, he says, he is placed into power based on the bay'ah that is taken from the Muhajirin and the Ansar, the closest companions of Rasulullah. The second Khalifa is placed, he is appointed by the first Khalifa. Sometimes we talk about democracy, but there was no democracy when it came to the second Khalifa. He was appointed by the first Khalifa. The third Khalifa, how was he appointed? He was appointed by a committee of people who the second Khalifa selected personally, and he said that you do not leave this committee until you choose the third Khalifa, until you choose the successor after me. But then when it comes time to the third Khalifa's reign, his rule, again, he changes the position and the title of his rule, not to Khalifatu Rasulullah anymore. He becomes now Khalifatullah, becomes the successor and the representative, in other words, of Allah himself. And so he decides, doesn't have to go and ask anybody's permission, how to deal with, for example, how to deal with Baytul Mal, the treasury of the Muslims, Malullah, the possession of Allah. And so we see that now the Khalifa decides, I am going to give the taxes of an entire region like Iraq. The region of Iraq is not the country that we see on the map today. The region of Iraq was a huge region with a lot of tax revenue. He says, I will give the entire tax revenue from this entire region to the person that I want. I can choose who I give that to. I can choose to give the governorship of the entire region of Egypt to the person that I want. And that person, it's not based on, for example, that person's taqwa or that person's ability to lead, that person's sort of leadership capabilities or skills. No, it is based on my decision. And if anybody were to go against my decision, I will either exile him, or I will beat him, or maybe even I will kill him. And so we see some of the greatest companions of Rasulullah, person like Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. He comes and he calls out the third Khalifa. He says, you spend the money of God as you will. You place as governors in the various cities, ruling over the Muslims, people from your own family. Walid ibn Uqba, person from within the family of Banu Umayyah, he's a person who openly drinks. He openly drinks and he comes to the Fajr Salat, the prayer in the morning, while he is drunk. That famous story. He comes and he recites not, how many rakat do we have in the morning prayer? It's 2 rakats. Right? He recites not just 2 rakats, he recites 3 rakats, 4 rakat prayer. And he says, is that not enough? Do you guys want me to do more? I can continue if you'd like. While he is drunk. And the people of Kufa, they cast him out of the city of Kufa. Now he is on his way back to the city of Medina. And the Khalifa is part of the same family as Walid. The Khalifa and everyone around the Khalifa, they know what Walid has done. Witnesses, one after another, come to the Khalifa and they bear witness to what he has done. And they say that he is drunk and he drinks and he comes and he outwardly he comes and he flaunts the commandments of Allah. What will you do in the face of this transgression? The Khalifa, he is part of the same family. And the people around the Khalifa are all afraid of doing anything against Walid. And so it takes a person of courage, a person of fortitude, and a person of principle like Imam Ali to come and now carry out the punishment that Rasulullah had set into place. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And so the legacy of the Prophet, the person who was supposedly upholding that legacy of Rasulullah, was being forgotten and was being flaunted by those very people. Khalifatullah is now not fulfilling the punishments that Rasulullah had set into place. And he's not even fulfilling the certain traditions that Rasulullah, the values of justice, of equality amongst the Muslims. He is changing all of those memories of Rasulullah. One of the biggest tragedies and the biggest travesties of the people who came after Rasulullah is that they said, we have a tradition and we have certain teachings of Rasulullah, but there are times that we even as Muslims and as leaders of the Muslims, even if we know what Rasulullah did. There are sometimes gaps, right? Rasulullah maybe did some things and maybe the Muslims forgot. Or maybe, for example, there are new circumstances that the Muslims have to deal with. The Muslims did not know certain things that were going on in the farthest regions of the world. They didn't know how to deal with, for example, people who were living in those regions. But then there are times when we have very clear instructions from Rasulullah. Again, we're thinking about the legacy and the memory of the Prophet of Islam. There are times when we have very clear instructions, but the people who come after the Prophet of Islam has passed away, they make a false hadith, and they make this teaching and this tradition amongst themselves, that even when we have a hadith and teachings from Rasulullah, we can contravene and we can go against those very teachings. And there's that famous hadith that is supposedly said by Rasulullah himself. It's a famous story that maybe we have heard. That one day Rasulullah, he comes and into the city of Medina. And he sees that these people of this city, it's a city filled with palm trees and date palms, that the people would harvest those dates and they would go and sell those dates out in the market. I had never seen date palms in the US until I came to your city. We have palm trees in the city. And the way that palm trees give dates is by a person going and fertilizing those date palms, and this has to be done mechanically and in a very particular way. Rasulullah sees, supposedly according to this hadith, he sees that there are people doing this very act. They are fertilizing by hand those date palms. And he says, what is it that these people are doing? He asks people around him. And the response comes that this is what we have always done. This is our tradition and this is what we do. Rasulullah says, maybe you can just leave this off. You don't have to go and do all of this, go through all of this trouble. Allah will set this in place. These are my words. He says, just leave this off. The next year comes. The people of Medina, as could have been foreseen, they don't have dates for that year. Or at least the yield is much less than they had expected. And the people come complaining to the Prophet of Allah himself, the Messenger of Allah, whose words are revelation, whose lessons and whose teachings are from God himself. And they come and complain. They say, we followed your command. Look what it resulted in. According to this hadith, Rasulullah, he responds, antum a'lamu bi amri dunyakum. You are more familiar and you know better how to deal with the things of your world. وَإِذَا أَمَرَتُكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّن رَأْيِي فَإِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ. If I were to ever command you to do something from my own opinion, so we take it from revelation, that the Quran itself says whatever the Prophet gives you is revelation. It's not from his own opinion. It now comes, Rasulullah supposedly says, if I were to ever give you my own opinion, then I am only a human being like you are. I make mistakes and you make mistakes. So go based on your best judgment. We think about what is the legacy of Rasulullah. On the one hand, the legacy of Rasulullah becomes something that is shared within the very enemies of Rasulullah. It becomes something that is the plaything of those leaders of the Muslims. They can allocate and give to whoever they want the money of the Muslims. They can go out and torture and maybe even kill whoever comes and disagrees with them. And now they can contravene and go against the very words of Rasulullah himself. And they could go based on their own opinion. This is what brings us to the time of Muawiyah. Now Muawiyah, he does not leave it at that. Muawiyah, he takes it even a step further. There's one thing we should understand. When it comes time to the reign of a person like Muawiyah, he was, in the end of the day, he was never a legitimate ruler of the Muslims. In the end of the day, the Muslims had come and given their allegiance to Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And so Amirul Mu'mineen was Imam Ali was the Khalifatullah or Khalifatul Rasulullah according to the Muslim population. Despite all of those battles and all of those wars that occurred, all of those same Muslims had come and gave their allegiance to Imam Ali. Even those very same people who came and fought against Imam Ali. No one had come and given bay'ah or allegiance to Muawiyah. In other words, Muawiyah was not recognized as a proper Khalifa. And so Muawiyah has to take one strategy and another simply to give himself legitimacy to rule over the Muslim Ummah. And so he takes and he buys people out. He goes and he pays some of the companions of Rasulullah, some of those same people who were supposedly passing on the hadith of Rasulullah, and he goes and he pays them for those who would listen with money. And then for others, he would go and kill them. He would hunt them down and he would kill them. And then for others, he would try to exile them to various lands. It comes to a point where Muawiyah becomes known as one of those people who creates different sunan that the Muslims and the Khalifa now comes and continues after Muawiyah. Let me give you a few examples. First of all, we sometimes talk about Khalifa, right? Khalifatullah. At least when you say Khalifatullah, first it was Khalifatul Rasulillah, the successor or the representative of the Messenger of God. Now it becomes the representative of who? Khalifatullah, the representative of God. But Muawiyah is the first person, the first ruler of the Muslims who calls himself a king. Ana awwalul muluk. I am now a king. We're thinking about what are the things at stake. Why did Imam Hussein rise up? He's rising up against not a representative of God, not a person who is trying to establish the religious principles, but he is rising up against a person who's calling himself a king. Person who takes his lessons from the kings of and the emperors of the Romans and the emperors of the Persians. That's one of the first bid'ah that Muawiyah puts into place. Another bid'ah, another one of the things that either he does or one of his governors do. It is said that one of the governors of Muawiyah, Ziyad ibn Abi, was one of the first people who goes and he imprisons. And these are particular examples that are relevant during the time of Imam Hussein. He comes and he not just kills some of the close companions of Imam Ali, but he comes and he imprisons them, and he comes and he imprisons their women and their children. One of the first the first times that we hear about in Islamic history, that a woman is imprisoned along with men in the same cells, or at least in the same prison as other men, was by the governor of Muawiyah himself, Ziyad ibn Abi. He was also the first person who comes and cuts off the head of the person that he is fighting, and he comes and he rallies those heads throughout the cities of the Muslims, so that the Muslims can pay good attention that if you go against the Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you go against the commander of the faithful, the leader of the Muslims, the kings of the Muslims, then this is your fate. We talked about وَفِرْعَوْنِ بِالْأَوْتَادِ, right? Pharaoh, who comes and tortures the people who go against him. One of the first people who comes and imprisons women and children, and he kills. I mean, these are very difficult words to say, but all of these things are traditions that we see occurring during the battle and after the battle of Karbala. Where do these things begin? These things begin during not the time of Yazid, but these are traditions and sunan that begin during the time of Muawiyah. Muawiyah had a general in his army by the name of Busr ibn Abi Arata, or Busr ibn Abi Arata. This was a person who was, again, a general of Muawiyah, and he fought against Imam Ali during the battle of Siffin. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He is commanded by Muawiyah. Again, this is not during the time of even Imam Hassan. This is during the time of the Khilafat of Amirul Mu'mineen Imam Ali. First, Muawiyah, he takes over the region of Egypt through one means or another. And then he sends out his generals to go and to kill whichever Muslim and whichever believer who is going to oppose me. And so he sends this person by the name of Busr. This Busr, imagine you are the Muslims. You have never seen a person go through one city after another. It is said that he first starts with the region of Yemen, the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. He starts there and he begins to go into one city and he kills whoever opposes Muawiyah. And then he continues and he goes to the city of Medina, the city of the Prophet of Islam, the city which had all of these different companions of the Prophet. And it is said that Busr, he goes and he massacres the people of that city. Next stop on his journey is the city of Mecca, the sanctuary of the Muslims, a place where whether you are Muslim or you're not, no one is allowed to be killed in that city. Even the animals are not allowed to be killed. And yet, this person, he goes and he kills one city after another, one region after another. He goes and he kills anyone who opposes, supposedly, the Amirul Mu'mineen. One of the things that he sets into place is that he is the one who kills the children of a person by the name of Ubaidullah ibn Abbas, who was the governor of Amirul Mu'mineen. You might have heard of a person called Abdullah ibn Abbas. This was his brother, that famous companion who was known to be one of the greatest mufassirin of the Muslims. This is the brother of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Rasulullah. Ubaidullah it is said that this man, this general of Muawiyah, Busr, he comes and he kills even the children of Abdullah. So the first person who is willing to go and kill even children, will not spare even the young children, the innocent, is by the command of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. This is the context. This is what is at stake when we think about why is it that Imam Hussein is rising up and is not willing to pledge allegiance to Yazid and is not willing to abide by whatever Muawiyah says. This is what is happening to the legacy of Rasulullah. There is a kingship that is set into place. And no matter who you are, whether you are the family of Rasulullah, whether you are women or you are children, you will not be spared the sword of the king of the Muslims. And so whenever somebody comes and he praises Muawiyah, or he comes and he defends the actions of Muawiyah, this is the type of person they are defending or they are praising. He is not a companion, sometimes people say. He is a companion of the Prophet. Or maybe he is a relative of the Prophet. This is his actions and the actions of the people who are underneath him. Tonight, let us turn now our attention towards the events of Karbala. We said that one of the traditions that Muawiyah sets into place is the killing of children and the most innocent of people within society. It is said that delegate of Imam Hussein, Muslim ibn Aqil, he had entered into the city of Kufa, not alone, but he had come with his two children. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen. وابن سيد الوسيين صلى الله عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. Let us turn our hearts and our minds towards Imam Hussein, a person who stood up to a person like Yazid. He sends out his delegate, Muslim ibn Aqil, to the city of Kufa. As I mentioned, Muslim enters into the city, not alone, but with his two young children by the name of Muhammad and Ibrahim. It is said that when Muslim enters into the city, again, as I mentioned in a previous night, Muslim enters into it with a certain hope that these people are going to stay loyal to their oaths and to their allegiance to Imam Hussein. And yet when the time comes, when Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the same son of Ziyad ibn Abi, the governor of Muawiyah, when this person comes into power into the city of Kufa, and he takes the governorship of that city, he strikes a fear into the hearts of the people of Kufa. And so slowly Muslim sees that his ranks are starting to become empty and they're starting to become thin. And so at one point, Muslim finds himself all alone. Imagine you are in the place of Muslim. You are in a foreign city and nowhere to seek refuge. And imagine now you have your two children, you have your two sons with you. Children who cannot protect themselves or defend themselves. Children who are innocent. And you know what the tradition of the Banu Umayyah are. They will not spare even the youngest children. of their wrath. And so Muslim, it is said, he gave the hands of his children, he placed them in the hands of a person that he thought could protect them. And yet, Muslim, he goes out and he fights a brave fight. But ultimately, Muslim is captured by Ubaidullah and his soldiers. And he is taken up to the governor's palace. And it is said that Muslim is bloodied and he is tearful. And Muslim is asked, he is said, you are one of the Ahlul Bayt. Why do we see you while you are tearful? And yet Muslim does not say, I am tearful and I am crying because I am fearful for my children. Muslim does not even give a second thought to his children. He only thinks about what he has promised his Imam Hussein. He has told his Imam and he knows that Imam Hussein is on his way. And so Muslim, he faces his fate with courage, but with sadness in his heart. Despite the fact that he knows his children are at the mercy of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. And yet, Ubaidullah does not spare his children. And it is said that the children of Muslim, Muhammad and Ibrahim, they are taken out by the riverside. And by one means or another, they are slaughtered by that riverside. And even today, you can find the graves of the children of Muslim in the land of Iraq. But these are not the only children that were killed in the plains of and on the path of Imam Hussein. It is said that Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, that same general of the army of Yazid. Let us turn towards the plains of Karbala. On the day of Ashura, it is said that Hur, he knows who Imam Hussein is. And he is the one who has stopped Imam Hussein in his tracks. He said to Imam Hussein a few days ago that, Ya Hussein, Ya Aba Abdullah, I have been given orders that you cannot go any farther towards the city of Kufa. And so Hur is responsible for stopping the path of Imam Hussein. And Hur was also with his son. And it is said that on the day of Ashura, Hur now sees that his heart is wavering in what he has done. And he is having second thoughts. It is said that Hur was in the presence of Umar ibn Sa'd, the general of Yazid. And it is said that Hur is pacing back and forth in his tent. He does not know what to do. Umar ibn Sa'd, he looks to Hur and he says, "O Hur, I have never seen you. You were the general of the city of Kufa. You were the bravest man of that city. I have never seen you in such a state. Why do I see you wavering? And why do I see that your face has become pale? And maybe that beads of sweat are pouring from your face. I have not seen you in such a place where you have lost your courage and you have lost your strength." Hur responds. He says, "Inni wallah ukhayyiru nafsi bayna al-jannati wan-nar." I see myself, by Allah, choosing between paradise and the hellfire. فَوَاللَّهِ لَا أَخْتَارُ عَلَى الْجَنَّةِ شَيْئًا وَلَوْ قُطِعْتُ وَحُرِقْتُ. I will never, by Allah, choose anything over the paradise of Allah and over the satisfaction of Allah. And so it is said that Hur comes to his young child, to his son, and he says, "Oh my son, I have decided to change my path. I have made a mistake. Will you accompany me towards the camp of Imam Hussein. I have made a mistake and I want to now go and see if Imam Hussein will accept my apology. I hear the children of Imam Hussein crying out for just a drop of water. I cannot bear to hear those cries any longer. Oh, my son, will you accompany me towards the camp of Imam Hussein? His son accepts. And so Hur, imagine he is walking towards the camp of Imam Hussein. And maybe he sees the Imam standing in front of his tents. He sees the Imam waiting for him to come. He comes closer towards the tents. And the wailing and the crying of the children is getting louder and louder. And Hur knows in his heart that I am responsible for these tears. I am responsible for the crying of the children and for their thirst. And so Hur cannot bear to go any closer. And he comes towards the Imam, but he does not go into the tents. He sees that the Imam seems like he is waiting. The Imam says, "Oh Hur, what do you want from us? Have you not done enough? Do you not hear the children wailing and crying?" Hur says, "Oh my Imam, oh Aba Abdullah, I have come to seek your forgiveness and to say I am sorry. Oh my Imam, is there any forgiveness for a person like me? Is there any tawbah for a person like me?" It is said that the Imam responded, "Oh Hur, I have been waiting for you to come back to us. Of course, there is forgiveness. We are the Ahlul Bayt. Our door is always open." But Hur says, "Oh my Imam, Ya Aba Abdullah, I cannot bear to hear the cries of these children. Will you allow me and my son to be the first people to go and sacrifice our lives for you and defend you?" The Imam allows Hur this honor. It is said that Hur says to his son, "Oh my son, I want to go and see you. See how you fight in the battle. I want to be able to see your courage and your bravery in action." And so it is said that his son, Hur's son, he goes out and he sees his father. He allows his father to see him fight. And he had a brave fight. But ultimately the son of Hur falls to the ground. And may this never happen. But a father goes out and he cradles the head of his son in his arms. And he praises his son. Hur, he says, "My son, you have fought a brave fight. And you have defended Aba Abdullah, the son of Fatima. And I am pleased with you." It is said that Hur brings this body of his son back towards the tent. But now it is time for Hur to go out and fight. And it is said that Hur kills many of them enemy soldiers, but ultimately falls to the ground. This once upon a time enemy of Imam Hussein, it is said that now Imam Hussein, when he sees that Hur falls to the ground, and he is wounded and he is injured, and his blood is pouring from his body, it is said that Imam Hussein now comes like an eagle over the body of Hur, and he cradles the head of Hur in his arms. And Hur looks up, he opens his eyes, and he sees Imam Hussein himself is above his head. And he says, "Oh my Imam, do you accept my sacrifice in your path?" The Imam says, "Yes, O Hur, you are free as your mother has named you. Anta Hur fi dunya wal akhirah. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون." Matam Hussein.
Hussein. شهیدین کربلا 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 Habib and Muslim have come to ask for permission to join the garden of love of Allah, fountain of death for wilayah. The garden of love of Allah, fountain of death for wilayah. Mawla Hussein is restless, I can't let you go, my friends. Mawla Hussein is restless, I can't let you go, my friends. This has no meaning to these men. They ask Mawla a small question. Mawla Jan, what's the meaning of living without you? Mawla Jan, what's the meaning of living without you? Mawla Jan, what's the meaning of prayer without you? Mawla Jan, what's the meaning of iman without you? Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala. Everyone, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala. Habib and Muslim have come to ask for permission to smell the perfume breeze of Shahada, the reliever of distress. After Hussein, where is the scent to kiss from under his feet? After Hussein, where is the scent to kiss from under his feet? After Hussein, where is the smile to seek for refuge in the heat? After Hussein, where is the smile to seek for refuge in the heat? Mawla Jan, there is no life for us without you. Mawla Jan, there is no life for us without you. Mawla Jan, which footsteps to adore without you? Mawla Jan, who smiled to live for without you? Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala. Habib and Muslim have come to ask for permission to taste the sweet taste of sharp arrows, delightful flavor of spears. For you, Hussein, his heart's beat. For you, Hussein, his chest breathe. For you, Hussein, his heart's beat. For you, Hussein, his chest breathe. These necks created for you. We have a small question for you. Mawla Jan, what life have we known without you? Mawla Jan, what life have we known without you? Mawla Jan, this blood in our veins is for you. Mawla Jan, our soul was created for you. Shahidain Shahidain Karbala, Shahidain Karbala, شهيدين كربلاء شهيدين كربلاء شهيدين كربلاء شهيدين كربلاء شهيدين.
If I can please have the brothers proceed to the Urdu hall, the sisters will start coming in here.
آپ رشتہ بتا دیا کہ مولا عباس کی سگی بہن جناب رقیہ ان کے بچے تھے طفلان مسلم اور جناب عبداللہ کربلا میں ماں کے ساتھ تھے. عزادارو اس ماں کی دل کی کیفیت کیا ہوگی جس کا شوہر کوفے میں مارا گیا, جس کے 2 بچے کوفے میں مارے گئے, ایک بیٹا عبداللہ کربلا میں تھا. کہتے ہیں جب علی اکبر آتے ہیں آقا بابا ہمیں اجازت دیجئے, کبھی اونا محمد آتے ہیں ہمیں مامو اجازت دیجئے. عبداللہ بھی پیچھے نہیں رہا, عبداللہ بار بار آ کے کہتے تھے مولا ہمیں اجازت دے دیجئے. آخری جو